Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
My name is Sophia, and I arrived in Lisbon on a quiet spring morning, carrying both excitement and a little nervousness in my heart. It was my first time in Portugal, and everything around me felt new. The air outside the airport was warmer than I had expected, and it carried a light smell of salt from the nearby river. The sky was a pale blue with soft clouds drifting slowly, and the city seemed to wake up gently as I stepped into it for the first time. I took a small taxi from the airport to the guest house I had booked online. The driver was friendly and spoke a few words of English. He pointed out buildings as we passed, telling me short facts about them. I smiled and nodded, even when I did not understand everything. My eyes kept moving from one side of the street to the other, trying to take in every detail. The tiled walls, the small balconies with plants, the narrow streets that looked too small for cars, but still carried them. When we arrived at the guest house, I paid the driver and pulled my suitcase to the entrance. The building was painted a soft yellow, and green shutters framed each window. There was a little pot of red flowers on the step by the door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cleaning soap and coffee. A woman at the desk looked up from her computer and gave me a warm smile. She checked my booking, handed me a key, and told me breakfast would be served until 10 o'clock. Her voice was calm, and she spoke slowly, which made me feel comfortable. My room was small but clean. There was a bed covered with a plain white sheet, a wooden chair, and a window that opened onto a quiet street where I could see a laundry line with clothes moving in the breeze. I set my suitcase next to the bed and placed my small shoulder bag on the chair. I thought about lying down for a short rest, but my stomach made a quiet sound that reminded me I had not eaten anything since the meal on the plane. I felt a sudden desire for something fresh and warm. Rest could wait. I picked up my bag again and left the room, locking the door behind me. The streets near the guest house were narrow and made of stone. My shoes made a soft tapping sound as I walked. The morning sun touched the tops of the buildings, making the white tiles glow. I passed a small shop with postcards in a spinning stand outside. A man was setting up a flower stall with buckets of red, yellow, and pink tulips. 2 children ran past me laughing, their school bags bouncing on their backs. After walking for a few minutes, I noticed a small bakery on the corner of the street. It had a glass window where I could see a display of bread and cakes. 2 wooden tables stood outside, each with simple metal chairs. Through the open door, I could hear the low sound of people talking and the clinking of cups. The smell of warm bread reached me even before I stepped inside. I pushed open the door and felt the warm air wrap around me. Behind a long counter were baskets filled with different kinds of bread. Some were long and thin, others were round with golden crusts. There were also small sweet rolls dusted with sugar that looked soft enough to melt in the mouth. The woman behind the counter wore a white apron and had her hair tied back. She smiled and asked what I would like. I ordered a cup of tea and a basket of the sweetbread rolls. She put the rolls into a paper bag and poured my tea into a small white cup. The smell of the bread was rich and comforting, and the tea gave off gentle steam. I turned to look for a table, but they were all taken except one seat at a table near the window. At that table sat a man in his 40s wearing a faded blue cap and a gray jacket. He had short hair and a few lines on his face that suggested he had spent much time outdoors. His hands were resting on the table, and he was looking out of the window at the street. He gave no sign that he noticed me, but there was something calm about his presence. I walked over and asked softly if I could sit there. He gave a small nod without turning his head fully toward me, so I placed my tea and the paper bag on the table. I pulled out the chair slowly, not wanting to disturb him. The chair creaked a little as I sat down. I opened the paper bag and took out one of the bread rolls. It was warm in my hand, and when I tore it in half, a little sweetness rose into the air. I took a slow bite, letting the soft bread melt on my tongue. I sipped my tea and let my eyes wander out the window. The street outside was busy with people walking, talking, and carrying bags. A bus passed slowly, and a cyclist moved quickly beside it. For a few minutes, we both sat in silence. The man did not speak, and I did not feel the need to say anything either. It was a comfortable quiet, like two strangers sharing a small piece of time without asking for more. Then, without warning, something happened that made me pause. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man's hand move toward the basket of rolls. He reached in, took one, and began to eat it slowly. He looked calm, his eyes still on the street outside, as if nothing unusual had happened. I froze for a moment, my mind catching up with what my eyes had just seen. The roll he was eating had come from the basket in front of me. Or at least, I thought it had. My first reaction was confusion. Perhaps he believed the rolls were for both of us. Or maybe he had ordered them himself, and they had been placed on the table before I arrived. I wanted to ask, but the words did not come. Instead, I took another roll and ate it quietly, my thoughts spinning. As I chewed, I tried to watch him without being obvious. He seemed completely relaxed, not even glancing at me as he took another slow bite. I felt a small mix of curiosity and discomfort. Was this how people in Lisbon acted when food was on the table? Did strangers share without asking? Or was I missing something important? I decided to wait and see what happened next. My teacup felt warm in my hands, and the smell of bread still floated between us, but now the air seemed to carry a small tension I could not explain. I placed the half-empty basket in the middle of the table, wondering if he would reach for it again. I watched the man as he finished chewing the bread roll. He did not look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the movement outside the window, where people walked past in the morning light. I told myself not to think too much about it, but my mind kept returning to the same question. Why had he taken one of the rolls without asking? I reminded myself that perhaps they were his, and I had been the one eating them without realizing. That thought made my face feel warm, but then I remembered the paper bag in my hand and how the woman at the counter had given it to me. I took another small sip of tea, hoping the warm taste would settle my thoughts. The cup felt almost empty now, and I placed it back on its saucer slowly, listening to the quiet clink it made. The man moved slightly in his seat, leaning forward just enough to reach into the basket again. His fingers closed around another roll, and he lifted it without hesitation. This time, I felt a tiny spark of irritation. It was not anger exactly, but a sharp awareness that something was not right. I watched him bite into the bread and chew slowly, as though the moment was ordinary. My hands rested in my lap, but my mind was busy. I thought of saying something, but the words seemed too small for the situation. Would it sound rude if I asked if the bread was his? Or would it sound foolish if I explained that I thought it was mine? Instead, I decided to wait. Waiting felt easier than speaking. I picked up another roll for myself and took a slow bite. The bread was still warm, and the sugar dusted on top melted on my tongue. I tried to focus on its sweetness, but my eyes kept returning to the basket between us. It was already looking less full. The bakery was still busy. A couple at the counter laughed as they ordered coffee. A small child pointed at the cakes and pulled at her mother's coat. Outside, a street musician played a soft tune on a guitar, the notes drifting in through the open door. All of it should have felt calm and pleasant, but for me, the air at our table had changed. It was as if the quiet between us now carried a question neither of us wanted to speak. I thought about the man. He looked like someone used to waiting, someone who could sit still without feeling the need to fill the silence with words. His blue cap was slightly worn, the color faded in places. His jacket was simple, with a small tear at one sleeve. His hands, though, were steady and clean, the fingers long and careful. I noticed the way he held the bread, not rushing, not hiding it. It was as if he truly believed there was nothing strange about taking it. By now, I had eaten 3 rolls, and he had eaten 2. That meant only 1 was left. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as my eyes rested on it. It seemed strange to care so much about one small piece of bread, but it was no longer only about the bread. It was about the unspoken game between us, a quiet back and forth that had started without warning and was now reaching its final moment. I took another sip of my tea, even though there was hardly any left, just to give myself something to do. When I set the cup down, I saw his hand move again. He reached for the last roll without looking at me, as though it was simply the next natural step. His fingers closed around it, and he lifted it from the basket. Our eyes met for the briefest moment, and I could not tell if there was a smile hiding behind his calm expression. He took a bite, and I felt a mixture of surprise and something close to defeat. I told myself I should not feel this way over bread, yet I could not shake the feeling that I had lost some silent challenge. I sat back in my chair, letting my hands rest on my lap again, and watched him finish the roll. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and then brushed his hands together lightly, as if to remove the last traces of sugar. The basket was now empty. My tea was gone. The air between us felt different again, lighter now that the quiet struggle had ended. I considered leaving, but part of me still wanted to understand what had just happened. He shifted in his seat, reached into the pocket of his jacket, and pulled out a small piece of paper. He unfolded it and read it for a moment, then tucked it away again. I wondered what it was. A letter? A receipt? A note from someone important? I wanted to ask, but again, the words did not come. Around us, the bakery had begun to empty as the morning rush passed. The couple at the counter had left, the child with her mother was gone, and the street musician outside had moved to another corner. The room was quieter now, and I could hear the sound of plates being stacked in the kitchen. The man reached for his cup and drank the last of his coffee. He placed the cup down carefully and rested his hands on the table again. For a moment, I thought he might speak, but he did not. Instead, he looked out of the window once more, watching the street as if the world outside was far more interesting than anything inside. I began to wonder if perhaps he was not even aware of the small story that had played out between us. Maybe he did not think of the bread as mine or his. Maybe to him it was simply bread on a table, there to be eaten. The thought made me feel both calmer and more curious. I decided to check my phone before leaving. I reached into my bag, feeling for it, my fingers brushing past my wallet and a small notebook. As I moved things aside, I felt something soft under my hand. I pulled it out and stared. It was another paper bag. My breath caught for a moment as I opened it. Inside were 6 warm, sugar-dusted bread rolls, untouched. I stared at the second paper bag in my hands as if it were an object I had never seen before. The paper was slightly warm against my fingers, and it made a faint crinkling sound when I moved it. Slowly, I pulled apart the folded top, almost afraid of what I would find inside. There they were, 6 sweet bread rolls, soft and golden, their tops lightly dusted with sugar. They were untouched. The sight of them made my stomach twist, not from hunger this time, but from the heavy realization that began to settle over me. I turned my eyes toward the empty basket on the table, the one the man and I had been taking bread from since I sat down. The truth came to me all at once, sudden and sharp. Those rolls had never been mine. I had not been sharing my bread with him. I had been eating his bread, piece by piece, without a single word of permission. My face burned with heat as embarrassment flooded through me. It was the kind of embarrassment that made your heart beat faster and your chest feel tight. I thought of every moment since I had sat down. The quiet way he had reached for the first roll, the calm look on his face, the way I had silently accused him in my mind of taking what was mine. I had been so sure I was in the right, and now I saw how wrong I had been. I looked at the man. He was finishing the last sip of his coffee. His movements were slow, unhurried. He picked up a paper napkin and dabbed his mouth, then placed it neatly on the table. His eyes were gentle when they glanced at me, not filled with judgment or annoyance. That, somehow, made me feel even worse. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, to tell him I was sorry, to explain the misunderstanding, but the words felt small compared to the mistake I had made. My voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry," I said, the words trembling slightly as they left my mouth. For a moment, He did not respond. Then he gave a small nod, as if acknowledging my apology without making more of it than necessary. To my surprise, a faint smile touched his lips. "Have a good day," he said softly, his voice deep and calm. Before I could say anything else, he stood up. He adjusted his jacket, picked up his empty coffee cup and the basket, and carried them to the counter. Then he turned and walked to the door. The bell above it gave a small ring as he stepped out into the sunlight. He did not look back. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty space he had left behind. My hands rested on the warm paper bag, and I could still feel the heat of the rolls inside. Around me, the bakery seemed quieter now, though there were still a few customers at the counter. A man was, stirring sugar into his coffee. A young woman was carefully choosing cakes from the glass display. Somewhere in the back, I heard the soft sound of a tray being placed on a metal shelf. But at my table, everything felt still. I could not stop replaying the moments in my head. How he had reached for the bread without hesitation. How I had watched him, waiting for some sign of guilt or apology that never came. How we had gone back and forth until the basket was empty. And all the while, he had been the one whose food was being taken. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how remarkable his behavior had been. He had not frowned. He had not pulled the basket closer to himself. He had not asked me what I was doing. He had simply allowed it to happen, sharing silently without complaint. It was a kind of patience I was not used to seeing, and it made me wonder if I would have been able to do the same in his place. I opened the paper bag again and took out one of my own rolls. It was still warm and soft, the sugar sparkling faintly in the morning light. I bit into it, but the sweetness felt different now. It was mixed with the sharp taste of the lesson I had just learned. I chewed slowly, thinking about how quick I had been to believe my own version of events. It struck me that this was something that happened not just in moments like this, but in many parts of life. We see a situation, we make an assumption, and we hold on to it tightly because it feels true. But sometimes we are wrong. And when the truth finally appears, it can feel as if the ground under our feet has shifted. As I finished the roll, I thought about how much this moment reminded me of learning a language. When you are learning English, there are times when you feel sure you understand something. You believe you have used the right word or pronounced it correctly. You feel confident in your choice. But then later, you discover you made a mistake. Maybe someone corrects you, or you hear the word used in a different way, and you realize your understanding was incomplete. At first, that realization can feel uncomfortable. You might feel embarrassed, just as I did when I saw the bread rolls in my bag. But the truth is, mistakes are part of learning. They are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that you are moving forward, because you can only correct something once you know it is wrong. The man in the blue cap had given me a perfect example of how to handle such moments. He could have reacted with annoyance. He could have told me sharply that the bread was his. Instead, he chose patience. He let me discover the truth myself. That, I thought, was the best kind of teacher. One who does not humiliate you, but allows you the space to see your own mistake. I decided that I wanted to carry that same patience into my own learning. When I made mistakes in English, I would remember this moment. I would try to be as gentle with myself as he had been with me. I would keep speaking, keep practicing, and keep learning, even when I stumbled. I finished my tea and stood up, holding the bag of bread rolls in one hand. As I walked to the door, I glanced back at the table where we had sat. It looked ordinary now, just a small wooden table by the window. But for me, it had become the place where I learned something important. About assumptions, about patience, and about kindness without words. The sunlight outside was brighter now, spilling across the street and making the white walls of the buildings shine. I stepped out into it and began walking back towards the guest house. The bag of bread felt light in my hand, but the lesson it carried felt heavy in the best way. I knew I would remember the man in the blue cap for a long time, not because of the bread we had shared, but because of the way he had handled the situation. Life is full of moments like this, I thought. Moments where you think you know exactly what is happening, only to realize you were wrong. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can react with anger, or you can react with patience. You can hold on to your pride, or you can accept the truth and learn from it. As I walked, I passed the flower stall again. The tulips were still bright in their buckets, their colors glowing in the sunlight. A man bought a small bunch and handed it to a woman who smiled as she took it. The scene was simple, but it felt connected to the morning I had just experienced. Small acts, a shared smile, a quiet patience, could leave lasting marks on a person. When I reached the guest house, I set the bread on the small table in my room and opened the window. The breeze carried in the sound of footsteps and distant laughter. I sat down and thought again about the blue cap, the calm face, the silent sharing, and I promised myself that next time I would look more carefully before deciding I understood the truth. Because sometimes the truth is sitting quietly right in front of you, waiting for you to notice it.